I'd like to thank you all for being here today to help us mark what can be described as one of the most important days in the Internet's history. It marks far more than the transition from one Internet address protocol to another. It marks the amazingly successful growth of the Internet, with people all over the world coming online with their devices. And it gives us a measurable number of that success. A pool of more than 4 billion Internet addresses has just been emptied this morning, completely depleted. There are no more. It is a point that the founders of the Internet thought would occur far in the future. A man who is generally credited with being the father of the Internet, Vint Cerf, said when he and his colleagues came up with the original protocol, what came to be called IPv4, 35 years ago, he said he thought it would be enough to do an experiment. His so-called experiment is what we have all come to call the Internet. Vint went on to say that the problem is that his experiment never ended. What I would say is that his experiment has continued to grow at rates unimaginable in the Internet's early days. Furthermore, it has transformed life across the globe. The depletion of IPv4 addresses marks an opportunity to shift to an Internet protocol that offers a pool of available Internet addresses so large that it is difficult to even imagine. It will be 1 billion trillion times larger than the 4 billion addresses available under the old protocol. We've all heard predictions about how in the future our refrigerators will be connected to the Internet to alert us when we're out of milk or butter. Our lights will be controlled by our smartphones, and our cars will be Wi-Fi hotspots on wheels. For all that to happen, we need Internet addresses, and that means we need to speed the global adoption of the next generation of the Internet protocol called IPv6. It's not an exaggeration to say the future of the Internet and the innovation it fosters lies within IPv6. This new Internet protocol is the vehicle that will carry us into an Internet future that is unpredictable for us, as it was for Vint Cerf 35 years ago today. Thank you.
I think that's a few years ago when I made the calculation that I would be in a position of the chair of the Number Resource Organization at this moment. So the predictions were were very exact. So it is my turn to be here. I'm not sure if it is a good thing or not. But no, certainly it is a big honor to represent the Number Resource Organization in this event. This event has been long awaited and therefore comes as no surprise. However, the fact that this has been long anticipated does not diminish its importance, and its importance is shown by the thousands of people that have followed over the Internet the ceremony of the allocation of the last /8. So we are facing a technological moment of huge significance in the history of the Internet. The regional Internet registries have worked for years preparing for this moment. We have worked long and hard and invested great effort in different IPv6 promotion and training activities, dialoguing with governments, with international organizations, and working very close with our communities. One of the many of the most remarkable facts is that the validity of this multi-stakeholder, open, participative, and democratic IP addresses administration system has been proven. This system, which may once have appeared to be extremely novel and therefore of uncertain future when it was created many years ago, has proven its success for years, making it to this moment to the exhaustion of the central pool of IPv4 addresses. Working in a participative and open manner, each region's community has promoted the policies it considered most appropriate at each time. For this reason, several regions have policies in force to ensure the availability of IPv4 addresses in the form of small allocations, both to existing Internet operators as well as to new entrants to the market. As Adil Ablogan remarked in the ceremony of the allocation of the last blocks, this policy of the allocation, the distribution of the last 5 blocks, one to each regional Internet registry, is is a proof also of how the community have cared about the things, trying to develop the policies to facilitate the transition to IPv6 in the best way. From now on, regional Internet registries will continue to have IPv4 addresses in their respective pools to satisfy the demands of their respective regions for some time. It is essential that those who have not yet taken measures for implementing IPv6 do that immediately to start deploying IPv6 in their networks. All conditions are in place for a successful IPv6 transition, one that will not affect Internet growth or the services accessed by users. And this is very important. We are optimistic and hope for this result. Regional Internet registries and the Number Resource Organization, the NRO, the organization that unites us, have worked and will continue to work with all our energy to make it happen in that way. Thank you.
So today begins the final chapter in the history of IPv4, as each of the 5 regions of the world have now received their final blocks of addresses to distribute for use in new network developments. The regions will each run out of IPv4 addresses at different times, at which point the new IP addresses available for Internet growth will be IPv6. The current IPv4-based network will, of course, continue to function as usual, but it is the we can think of it as generational change. The older or previous generation doesn't go away, and obviously still has a lot to contribute, but it is the newer generation that will carry the future. The sooner we all move to adopt IPv6, the better and brighter that future will be, as our imaginations will not be stunted by clumsy IPv4 workarounds, and the Internet will be able to do what it does best, supporting what we call permissionless innovation. The amazing growth and development of the Internet over the past 4 decades is a testament to the success of the work done in many organizations, amongst them the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF, and the Internet Architecture Board, the bodies that develop the standards and protocols that the Internet is built on. And I'll note that they just celebrated their 25th anniversary last month. And, of course, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, the body that actually coordinates the unique identifiers. This amazing success is also due to the approach taken to managing IPv4 addresses through the regional Internet registries. As a prime example of the Internet model, IP addresses are managed through a distributed, multi-stakeholder approach, enabling coordination of key global Internet resources. As the next stage of the Internet's ongoing evolution begins, the Internet Society applauds the efforts of early adopters and promoters of IPv6. Major Internet content providers have made their websites v6 accessible. Network providers around the world already have implemented, trialed, or announced IPv6 deployment plans. Governments have laid out plans with near-term timelines for adopting IPv6 for their own Internet-connected networks and services. And more examples can be seen on the Internet Society website, as well as the websites of the other organizations present here. Each of these adopters recognize that the fundamental key to the Internet's success, the unification of networks through global addressing. And let me repeat this, as it really is fundamental to maintaining the Internet we have all become accustomed to. The fundamental key to the Internet's success is the unification of networks through global addressing. This is why so many have stepped up to deploy IPv6. This momentum must be continued if we are to ensure the Internet does not become balkanized, does not disadvantage new entrants to the market, and if we are to leave markets, people, and online content reachable in ways consistent with the Internet service we have become dependent upon. But more remains to be done. We hope the milestone announced today sparks other organizations to plan for and deploy IPv6 as part of a strategy to ensure they are connected to a growing future Internet that is as dynamic and vibrant as today's. As part of its work to encourage the timely deployment of IPv6, the Internet Society is coordinating a World IPv6 Day on the 8th of June this year. Google, Facebook, Yahoo, Akamai, and Limelight Networks will be amongst some of the major organizations that will offer their content over IPv6 for a rigorous 24-hour global test drive. The goal of the World IPv6 Day is to motivate organizations across the industry, Internet service providers, hardware makers, operating system vendors, and web companies to prepare their services for IPv6 to ensure a full and successful transition as IPv4 addresses run out. There's a lot more information on IPv6 deployment and IPv6 World Day on the websites of all the organizations represented here, and I really encourage people to visit them and check back frequently. Thank you.
The allocation of the final IPv4 free addresses blocks to the regional registries today is both a significant and insignificant event. It is significant in that this moment has long been anticipated. The ITF It's a beautiful moment, isn't it? The ITF, the Standards Organization for Internet Protocols, started to work on an IPv4 successor almost 20 years ago. And IPv6, as we know it today, was standardized 15 years ago and has matured ever since. This event is insignificant in that next week the Internet will not be significantly different than it was a week ago. Compare that to running out of license plates. If we run out of license plates today, there would not be any impact on our driving, and we would still be taking our cars tomorrow. Similarly, there will not be any notable short-term effects caused by the exhaustions of the IPv4 free address pool. But therein lies a danger. In the long term, the application providers and their clients that utilize IPv4 addresses are likely to encounter issues because of the many kludges needed to keep those applications running. Meanwhile, applications that can communicate over IPv6 enabled networks will be more likely to encounter transparent end-to-end communication, enabling the continued development of innovative applications and services. Now, let's do a thought experiment. Suppose that you would compare the Internet of today with the Internet in 10 years. And let's do that for IPv4 and for IPv6. If we continue to remain dependent on IPv4, we will need to spend increasing resources operating an increasingly brittle and non-transparent network incorporating NATs, ALGs, CGNs, and other acronyms that describe mechanisms needed to help the IPv4 network keep up with its demand. Such an Internet is likely to grow increasingly less capable of serving our needs than it is today. Rather than maintaining a status quo, the IPv4 Internet is likely to degenerate. On the other hand, with an IPv6-based Internet, endless possibilities lie ahead, because every human on this planet, and their gadgets, and their fridges, and their cars, will be able to communicate, play, do business, supply services, do their social stuff, anything. That type of explosive growth of the Internet can only continue with the larger address space that IPv6 offers. The transition to IPv6 will not be effortless and requires the attention of equipment vendors, ISPs, CTOs and CEOs of businesses that do business on the Internet, system and network administrators, content providers, etc., etc., etc. However, my mother, my neighbors, my kids, they should never notice. They will continue to be delighted by the ongoing innovation and expanded services made possible by the architecture of the IPv6 Internet. Thank you.
Now let's get into the questions and answers. It looks like our first question is from the UK.
I actually have two questions. The first question is, with IANA handing out the last two blocks of addresses to APNIC on Tuesday, I mean, what is actually the news today? And secondly, could you give more information about the World IPv6 Day? What was the impetus? How did Google and Facebook, et cetera, get involved?
So given that 2 blocks were distributed to APNIC on Tuesday, what's happened today? Well, the policy and procedures were established so that once a drawdown was done until there were only 5 blocks left, that would trigger the distribution of the last 5 address blocks to each of the 5 regional internet registries, which is the final depletion or exhaustion of the free pool. That's what's occurred today.
And then with, with respect to the World IPv6 Day, the Internet Society has been working with many different organizations across the entire supply chain, if you will, to understand what were both the motivators and what were some of the limiters to IPv6 deployment. So this notion that we would actually really put a rigorous test on IPv6 across the world on all levels came through some of those discussions. Some of the sites are obviously already v6 enabled. The services are already v6 enabled. Many of you in the room are probably running v6 services and don't know it. So it literally was just to bring more attention to v6, to the state of readiness, and at the same time it will actually facilitate some trials at a global level.
Sure. I'm David Carr. I'm here for Forbes.com. We've heard a number of people have mentioned kludges and workarounds that are required to keep IPv4 working in this transitional period. I wonder if you could address a little bit some of the workarounds that might be necessary to be an early adopter of v6. As I understand it, even though big organizations like Google have created IPv6 enabled versions of their sites and services, the last time I checked with Google, you had to go to a separate subdomain, or your organization had to make some sort of special technical arrangements with Google in order to access the www Google homepage even. And there would be other content that would not necessarily be accessible if you're using v6 as your primary internet access method. So I'd just like you to address how organizations can best manage the transition if they do want to be early adopters and be ahead of the curve.
There is no easy one-shot answer to that particular question, because it really depends on the strategy that an individual business is going to deploy in order to get from IPv4 to IPv6. What is important in this context is that the internet as a network of networks has networks that run IPv4 only still in place. Actually, in essence, most of the internet today is running IPv4. And as a service provider, as a content provider, you would like to get, you would like to offer your users, regardless of what address family they're using, you would like to give them the same service. On the access level side, you have to consider that a lot of your clients will still have IPv4 only capable devices. There will be old PCs hanging around, maybe smartphones that do not yet carry IPv4, although I don't think there is many that do not do IPv6. But you have to make sure that those IPv4 only devices can connect to the IPv6 services. And then there is the matter of access networks that might be IPv4 or might be IPv6, and you have to run your traffic and translate it at some point. Going back to those kludges, those are technologies. The technologies that I just described are not necessarily kludges. There are a number of strategies you can take to implement those transition techniques. But if we get to the IPv4 internet and the growing need to connect devices, you will see that you have to do address translation techniques, and you have to stagger those address translation techniques. And what we've seen already, if you get too many layers of that, you basically cripple your ability to do end-to-end communication. Accessing a website might still be possible, but hosting a file sharing program or hosting your own content may become more and more difficult as the IPv4 address need grows and it's just not available. And that's where the kludges come in.
I would like to make a differentiation between access providers and content providers. For content providers, I think that what they have to do is to make the contents available for over IPv4 and IPv6. It is true what you say, that some content providers have been offering the contents over IPv6, but through separate websites. And I think that it was valid during this time in which some of them were using IPv6 as an experiment or as a pilot. But it will not happen in that way in the future. They will have to offer the same content over IPv4 and IPv6, and very soon. And I think that this initiative from Internet Society is trying to contribute right in that direction. So I think that this experiment that will be conducted in June will help very much. When we speak about content providers, we don't have to speak only about the big content providers. We have to think, for example, in governments. Governments have invested a lot of money in the last few years in electronic government services, and so they have to be sure that those services will be accessible for IPv4 and IPv6 users, and this is a very important point. For access providers, what they will continue offering IPv4 access for a lot of users, but what they have to guarantee is that those users that will be accessing internet with IPv4 or IPv6 will have access to transition mechanisms that will permit them to access the both worlds, IPv4 and IPv6. I think that the combination of the efforts in the two extremes, in the access providers and the content providers, is what will make the transition successful.
And to say that very short, everybody needs to take their own responsibility.
Yeah.
The internet is a network of networks, and there's nobody centrally mandating the use of IPv6. We all have to get there on our own, and we all have to get there together.
The question was which telcos, I think, are leading the charge in adopting IPv6 or moving over to IPv6?
I don't. I'm not ready for giving some concrete examples and promoting some brands in the world. But what I can say is that we have seen, especially in the last year, that a lot of ISPs are providing IPv6 services. And during a very important meeting that was held in Vilnius, in Lithuania, in the Internet Governance Forum, I remember that one ISP from UK, is exactly the place from which the journalist is participating, stand up and say that he said something like, some ISP think that there is no business behind IPv6. So I say that thank those companies, my company is earning a lot of money providing IPv6 services. So I think that's that many ISPs are providing IPv6 service just not as an experimental thing, but just as a business.
And I'll just add to that to what Raul has said. Some of the examples we've seen on this continent are AT&T and Comcast. Oh, I'm sorry, NTT. NTT and also Comcast. And I also understand the uptake has been quite aggressive across the Asian region, which I'm sure Paul Taylor could speak to at a later point. Paul Joe, yes. Thank you.
I think that there are companies in all the regions that are providing IPv6 services. You have mentioned some of them that are very notable examples, but there are a lot of them.
Okay, we have a question from Sean Kerner, who is the senior editor of Internet News. Does ICANN and/or IANA have any role to play now in how the final addresses that the RIRs have available to go out, or is it now entirely out of ICANN's hands with regards to the final sets of IPv4?
Sure. I'll address at a high level, and I'll let Raul add any details. But effectively, we've done our job. There are policies that have been developed by the RIRs and the NRO, and that have also been approved by ICANN that help to govern those. But ICANN's actions are largely done. There are some secondary things that we do and support. But I think Raul can provide a more complete explanation.
I think that ICANN and IANA has done a very good job in administrating IPv4 addresses space until now, as implementing and applying the policies that have been developed through the bottom-up policy development process around the world. I think that now the IPv4 addresses that remain in the pool of each of the regional internet registries will be allocated under the policies that are developed in each region according to the rules that the community has given to themselves in each region. What we call as the policy development process, that is a very participatory process and open, and I invite the people that could be interested in that to visit the websites of the respective region RIR to know how the policy development process works in that region.
Sean has a follow-up question. Why has IPv6 adoption to this date been so very slow?
Maybe because we still have IPv4 addresses. Olaf?
And it does require investment. It requires some effort. I mean, if you're building out a brand new network, it's pretty much as easy to do IPv6 or IPv4, but if you've got to convert and move a network, that requires effort and change and investment.
Is the internet in danger simply because IPv6 is not yet completely ready?
I think I'll let Olaf or someone else more knowledgeable on the technical side answer that one.
Well, as I tried to allude to in my opening statement, there is no imminent danger. Absolutely not. The internet tomorrow will remain working as it did yesterday, but the danger is in the possibilities, the opportunities, and the loss of opportunities that will exist in, say, a decade or maybe 2 decades from now, if we move away from an end-to-end model, which is a technical term that everybody can connect and do permissionless innovation. If we move away from that model because simply reaching each other by IPv4 end-to-end will become very, very, very difficult. Of course, there will still be internet, but that internet will look very, very much different than it does today. It might be very hard to make your Skype phone call. It might be very hard to do file sharing. It might be very hard to do all kinds of other stuff that we haven't dreamt of. If we move to IPv6, all those beautiful things remain possible. And actually, there will be innovations that I can simply not imagine at this moment. Because if you go back a decade ago, think of what is here now that wasn't here a decade ago. It's things like Twitter, Facebook, all the social networking, Skype telephony, video conferencing, all that stuff. We didn't do that a decade ago. That was on the far horizon. If we continue to move to IPv6, we'll have a myriad of opportunities. So imminent danger, no. Long term, yes.
Hi, my name's Allison Worrell, and I'm with PBS, is a nightly business report. And I'm posing this question in the hopes I'll get an answer that is so simple, it's easy enough for a high schooler to understand. Someone that, has never heard of IPv4, IPv6. And basically, what does this mean for e-commerce and businesses? Is it going to affect things in regards to domain names? I read on the ICANN website that you guys have been able to lower the cost of domain names by 80%. Is it going to have any impact on that? I also heard someone mention the potential for this new set of internet addresses to open up a world of new options. I know that you mentioned there in the end, Twitter, Facebook, etc. What does this really mean in terms of how businesses are structured? What do you guys foresee from the business end of this?
Shall I try to answer that as simple as possible?
Yes, please.
There are now 2 billion people that connect to the internet with an IPv4 address, 2 billion approximately. We still have place to grow and make use of more efficient addresses, but we've got 6 billion people on the world who want to connect themselves, their devices, etc., etc. That is simply not possible with IPv4. It's just not doable. There aren't sufficient addresses to hook everything and everybody up to the internet. It's not doable. What is the business impact if you don't make the transition to IPv4 now? Is that the next 2 or 3 billion customers will run IPv6 only, and they will not be able to do business with you. That's your business impact.
Sure, and I'll just complement what Olaf has said is a few things. First is, I think you may have also asked about domain names and will this have any impact on domain name costs. That is entirely separate. I mean, the domain name system is a set of systems that links from domain names to network addresses, and this just means that a domain name can now link to IPv6 addresses if that's what the operator has chosen. So there's no economic linkage between the IPv6 and domain names. What I'll say, what it means, I think, for businesses is a couple things. One, some will need to make an investment to IPv6 enable their websites, their different services, or to use IPv6 with their customers. That requires investment. But fundamentally, what we see here is opportunity. So we've avoided a crisis because the engineers were smart enough 15 years ago, 18 years ago to see that this would run out someday, and they did the difficult work because it was a lot of hard work to develop the standards for IPv6. That work got done, and it's available, and now it's becoming very relevant as all the IPv4 free address space is now gone. So the good news is there's opportunity. There will be a lot of different kinds of innovation, in part because there are so many addresses available under IPv6 that you won't have to use some of the other techniques you might have used before to get more out of the addresses you had, and that's going to improve that end-to-end point communication Olaf spoke about. And it may be used in ways we're not even imagining. I mean, imagine linking IPv6 addresses to applications that you have as an individual or services or something instead of just a device, or to different parts of your car, or different parts of a toaster. There's a lot of different things can happen, and it's not for us to predict those, but it will begin to happen as the brilliant entrepreneurs out there are able to leverage this. So we're looking at costs. There are costs across industry that you're going to see more CEOs asking their chief information officer, their CISO, what do we have to do to move to IPv6? And we ignored it for the last 3 years. I guess you were asking for something that actually is important. I guess we need to look at doing it now. So there will be actions, there will be changes to move to the new system, and then probably a lot of innovation happening as more of the network moves there.
We've got a question that was emailed in from Juliana Gruenwald. Juliana's the editor for National Journal's Tectos Daily blog. How many addresses were given out to each of the RIRs, and do you have an estimate on how long it will take for them to hand them out? When will they be totally exhausted and only IPv6 addresses will be all that's available?
Okay, as the first question was how many IPv4 addresses? It is 16 million, 16 million to each regional internet registry. The time, the exhaustion of in each region will be a different time, depending on the policies that are applied in each region. And it is estimated that the first region that will run out of IPv4 addresses will be Asia and Pacific. So Paul Wilson, the CEO of IPNIC, is here, and so I will pass later the word to him to say something about that. Two things is, one is that in some regions there are special policies that will be applied at some point when a given point is reached, and so it will extend the life of the IPv4 addresses. But it will not mean in any way that the RIR will be in a position to satisfy all the demand of IPv4 addresses. There will be IPv4 addresses for a long time in some regions, but in a form of very small blocks that will be useful only for ensuring the transition to IPv6. The second comment is that there are statistics and projections available in all of RIR's websites, and so I recommend to visit all the RIR websites in order to have the specific information for each region. But Paul, could you add something about the
Paul, you can use my
Asian
mic here
Pacific.
if you want. Paul Wilson, that is.
Sure, thanks. This is a very good question. The availability of IPv4 address space, the continuing availability is quite important for the ongoing transition to IPv6. In the Asia-Pacific region, like in the other RIR regions, we've paid a lot of attention over the years, over recent years, to the exact policies that are going to be in place during this final exhaustion of address space. Now, I mentioned earlier that the allocations that we... Is that better? Yes. The allocations that we are expecting to make from the remaining pool that we have will last for 3 to 6 months. I'm referring there to conventional allocations according to the current policies. We do have, as of some year or so ago, a special policy that applies to this block, to this last /8 block, and that is that it will be rationed, in effect, one small allocation available to every person every requester who comes along needing address space, and they will get one and one only. That small allocation of 1,000 addresses or so will be a really small allocation in terms of its usefulness for IPv4, conventional IPv4 deployment, but it's a critical block of addresses that will be absolutely required for anyone in future to interface through an IPv6 network into the current internet. Now that, at our expected rates of deployment, that last block, this one, is expected to last 5 to 10 years under the current policy, and that will take us right through the IPv6 transition for sure. Thanks.
Here's a question from Kevin Murphy, a freelance tech writer in the UK. Could you ask the panel to address the possibility of a black market emerging in IPv4 addresses?
Could you repeat the question? Could you repeat the
Sure.
likelihood?
What is the likelihood of a black market emerging now with regard to IPv4 addresses?
It is not sure that there will be a black market. In fact, this is certainly a possibility, but in all the regions are policies in place for allowing the transfer of addresses from organizations that have more addresses than they need to those that need those addresses. But it's based in rules that have been developed by the community in each region. And so I would not say that it would be a black market. I think that it would be an opportunity to trade in some way IPv4 addresses, but ruled by the community and by rules that will be implemented by the regional internet registry. I'm confident there is, of course, a possibility that some IPv4 addresses will be traded outside of the system. I'm very confident that it will be just a small amount of IPv4 addresses compared with those that will be transferred within the system. But it is obviously it is a possibility that this black market exists. I'm not sure that it will be an important one. And on the other hand, if the internet community moves to IPv6 adoption, so the value of the IPv4 addresses will decrease in the future, and so there will not be reasons for having that black market that is mentioned. Thank you.
Olaf, here's a question specifically aimed at you from Antonio Prado, a freelance journalist in Italy. We're preparing for a long coexistence. How long? I mean, for how much time will we see old IPv4 addresses around? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
I forgot my crystal ball. But more seriously, a long time. Not months, not years, more probably decade to decades. As long as there will be people who have legacy equipment on IPv4, they will need to be able to communicate, and there will need to be transition mechanisms in place to have them communicate with IPv6 addresses, which I hope in 10 years will be the majority make up the majority of the internet at that moment. But that is possible. As you just heard from Paul Wilson, there are, and that I believe those policies exist at every IRR. There are policies in place to allow those transition mechanisms to continue to stay in place for a decade to come.
Here's a very basic question from a journalist. The bottom line, for those of us who know little or nothing about IPv6, do I have to buy a new computer? Do I have to buy any other equipment right away? What's the impact on the average internet user?
You should not notice.
I would like to come back to something that Olaf Colman said before, that it depends on the responsibility of each of the internet actors. Internet is built on a cooperative model. And so I can provide, if I am an internet access provider, so I can provide IPv6 access to my customers. But if the content providers don't move to IPv6, so the users will not be in a position to access this content. So it depends on everybody, on the responsibility that every actor, every stakeholder on the internet. So if everybody do their homework, so the internet users will not be aware that the technology has changed.
And I would encourage everybody to go look for IPv6. You'll actually find that it exists in a lot more places than you actually expect, on a lot of vendor equipment, on a lot of computers, on, I mean, somebody told me this story, I think, of Olaf the other day looking for IPv6 on his iPad, and he thought, let me see if it's here.
No, it was different. The press announcement pointed me to the APNIC website, the press announcement for this little thing we're doing here. And on the top of the APNIC website, it says the IP address where you're coming from. And I was using this device over here, a tablet computer, and I noticed it said the IPv6 address. And I just didn't realize that these things had IPv6 out of the box. I was not very surprised, but still, it's completely unnoticeable that when you connect your machine to the network, and the network is IPv6 enabled, and the actors that operate all these devices have taken their responsibility, then the ordinary user, the guy who walks into a shop, buys this new device, turns it on, should not notice. Ordinary users should not notice, as long as everybody that operates the network of networks has taken their responsibility.
And even ADL said last night that much of the equipment in Africa is actually IPv6 enabled because of the growth they've been seeing there. The equipment they're actually buying is newer and more recent. So, I mean, I really would encourage people to go look for IPv6. You'll find a lot more of it out there than you, I suspect, believe.
Sure, and I think that how smooth the transition has been going, by the way, is yet another testimony to the power of this decentralized, multi-stakeholder, bottom-up driven community, where the engineering community saw a problem, decades before it hit, started working on solutions. Then the policy organizations, the addressing organizations worked on policies, worked that up through ICANN. ISOC has been educating, and it really shows the power of how the internet has been able to move so well because it was designed for collaboration of research in the very beginning, and this collaboration continues. As we even see here today at this table, I think it may be the first time that our four organizations have done a collective press announcement together at this historic time. But that's what works for the internet. It's the collaboration of all these parties, the regional internet registries, working with ICANN, with the IANA function, with the IETF and the IAB. This model is working incredibly well for the world and allowing the technology to keep moving and expanding for the benefit of mankind. And we'll work through this transition. And the good news is that the technology was already developed. And so now it's just about deployment and the decisions that a lot of individual actors need to have. But a crisis has been averted, I'd say, in large part because the decentralized community is so fluid and so capable of dealing with a rapid amount of change.
Our final question is going to come from Glenn Chapman, who is a AFP technology reporter for the AFP Newswire. He's based in San Francisco. Glenn?
Oh, hi, Brad, Rod, always a pleasure. Just you mentioned earlier that the pressures on the ISPs and others to make the transition and ordinary users won't notice. Just in a ballpark sense, how much do you think this is going to aggregate cost? I mean, if you could just sort of project out, is it going to cost us millions? Is it going to cost us billions? Yeah. And you say the importance of making this shift. What are the chances of the shift failing to IPv6 and us encountering this what's come to be called the IPocalypse that everybody's been
Sure, that someone like Glenn Chapman has been writing about.
Perhaps.
That was a good piece, and I'm going to ask John Curran, who runs Aaron, to help in answering that one if he can get the microphone here, and just say, you know, as a student of economics and someone who loves economics, you know, it's not an either or here. The transition is going to happen because we have scarcity has now hit of IPv4, and the world realizes when it has scarcity, we adjust and we move to a substitute or a different technology. In that case, it's IPv6. So I think the question is of how and what it'll cost. We'll let John give some insights.
Yeah, John Curran, President and CEO of Aaron. As the table said earlier, the cost is one of these items that each actor, depending on what role they play in the internet, needs to address, and everyone has their own role. Well, the fact of the matter is we've known about this transition, and there's a lot of parties that have actually actively been deploying IPv6. I know organizations that have turned on IPv6 for their websites already. They're using IPv6 in their office. I know it's the case in our point. When we deploy network infrastructure, it doesn't cost anything more except a little configuration work to turn on IPv6. We've seen the major content companies have, in fact, IPv6 versions of their websites, Google, Facebook, etc. And they've done that and made that part of the normal business of making content available. Now, they haven't put it out for everyone to see it because we're still testing things, and we're going to have the World IPv6 Day to work out some of the kinks. But the reality is that rolling out IPv6 is not a separate project. It's taking the projects that you're already rolling out for the internet and making sure that they're both IPv4 and IPv6 enabled. It's a cost of putting something on the internet that content companies and now enterprises, when they put their corporate websites out, should be looking at doing IPv6 deployment as part of their normal website application deployment. Taken that way, does it have a small incremental cost? Yes, a very small. It's not talking about new equipment. It's not talking about new hardware. It's talking about configuration of capabilities already in your web servers, already in your routers and your firewalls. So hopefully, this isn't a significant additional cost. I know for the organizations that have been doing this in parallel, that's certainly the case. If you've been ignoring IPv6 for the last decade, and you knew it was coming, and now you decide to launch a separate project to catch up, I don't know the cost, but that's something you will have to deal with yourself. And I would recommend instead you now make IPv6 deployment part of your normal life cycle of rolling out systems.
Thank you, John. I think Adil from AFNIC also has some thoughts to offer.
Yeah, thank you. What I will say will address the last part of the question, and I will take it the other way. What is the cost not deploying IPv6? Because today we have no choice. But what could be the scenario in few years when IPv6 will become the by default protocol of most of the network? Let's not forget that internet is one thing. When people will have IPv6 as default and people are still hanging behind with IPv4, they may have to pay to be connected with IPv4 because that is an additional cost for those who will be having IPv6. So let's look at it at what it will cost us if we don't move to IPv6. And the chance is very low that the transition will fail because we don't have choice.
Sure, and I'll just add, you know, from the economic standpoint, one party had mentioned to me that one emerging market country had tried to study, like, what would it cost them to move full on to IPv6. And this is a country with, I think, around 50 million people, and the estimate was roughly $1 billion. But I'm not going to stick myself to that number because that probably included upgrades they wanted to do to their network anyway. But you know, we're talking about billions of dollars here globally. You know, we're not talking about trillions of dollars. There is some expense, there is some effort, but if you look at the scale of investment in IT infrastructure, It's probably going to have more to do with how that spend is directed and steered than with creating additional line items or explicit growth projects.